Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspired podcast, and my guest today is Tom Rapsas. Tom is a spiritually blogger whose wake up call column at pathos.com has drawn more than 5 million views over the past 10 years. A long-time spiritual seeker, his major influences include Thomas More, John Templeton, and Mirabai Starr. Tom's previous two books are a spiritual fable called Thaddeus, Squirrel and Life Tweets, a book of inspirational quotes. He worked in the advertising industry as a writer and creative director for over 30 years, primarily in New York City. He's also the author of the book Wake Up Call, which will be released this month. Tom, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So, what is the exact day when your book will be released?
It actually is now out. It was released January 1, so it is out and available on Amazon right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I read the book. I went through every single chapter. I didn't try to skip anything. And I think we will take our discussion throughout the book and what exactly to the points that drew my attention. And the
Great.
first one was the story about your daughter when she was 5 years old, I think, and you were jogging and she was on her bike. She turned one
Yes.
corner, and then a car came right after her. And you thought that she was hit, and you'll find her on the ground dead pretty much. But she was alive, but she asked you a very interesting question. Daddy, am I dead?
Yes.
And you had your own questions after that event. And your first one was she spared that me and my wife won't go through the grief process, the painful process of grieving our dead daughter? But my question was different. Was she spared because she supposed to have a spiritual mission, purpose in this particular lifetime? So over the years, have you follow her from a spiritual angle? Did you find anything interesting that will draw this conclusion that the fact she was spared because she had a much higher purpose?
She is still developing spiritually. I mean, just to go back to that incident, it almost was not in the book. And the editor I was working with said you should open up a little more, put something personal, a personal spiritual experience. And that was a story that I really had not told anyone. I didn't even tell my wife for months and months afterward. It just shook me to the core. As you pointed out, the scary thing was she rounded a corner. There was a truck parked in the parking lane. A car came whizzing by. There seemed to be absolutely no room for her to fit between this car and the truck, just out of my sight. And I would have dismissed it. I would have easily dismissed it at that point to say, wow, she found a sliver of air and somehow that car just missed her. But it was her turning to me and very clearly saying, Daddy, am I dead? That shook me up. And I did not share that story with her for many years. I mean, I think she was probably when that happened, 6 or 7. I talked to her about it 10 years later. She had no memory of the incident whatsoever. She didn't recall it. She was surprised when I told her about it. And she is now 23 years old, 24 years old, and she is just developing spiritually. But that is a great point you make that uh, the lesson saved during that incident might not have been really me and my own sanity, but my daughter for some future mission in life. So yes, that's an interesting perspective and could be very true.
And also maybe her, higher self, angels, spiritual guides made her forget that experience, that she won't carry the trauma of that incident over the years, which will impact also her development.
True. It's very possible because I can say, I mean, uh, just watching that incident, and I can recall that night, I did not sleep a wink. I felt like my body was vibrating. I was just so shook up and searching for answers. And I did have the theory that maybe life, there's a theory, Everett's the guy's name. It's a theory in quantum physics that life splits in many directions as each decision is made in your own life. And that in one life that did happen in one path, but I was fortunate and she was fortunate to be on a different path where the incident didn't happen. It was a glimpse of what might have been.
Yes, it's good that this is exactly what happened, and no one had to suffer. Tom, let's discuss about the reasons behind the wake up call. It's a compilation of a lot of nuggets of wisdom and your own personal experiences. So, what exactly determined you to write the book?
Yeah, good question. It was a change in my own life. It happened. I want to say I was about the age 30 or early 30s, and I was in the advertising industry. I still am, in fact, retiring any day now. But it can be a crazy business, high pressure, lots of late hours, and I was kind of in a cycle at the time. I was single, where I was working a lot, drinking a lot, um, and just going through this each day, it was kind of an instant replay of the next. And I began to question, is that all there is to life? Is this it? Is there something I began to wonder because I realized I wasn't going to get any real satisfaction from advertising, but is there something else out there that might offer it? And at the time, a friend of mine offered me a book. It was kind of an innocuous book. It was about the teaching of character and awareness to Green Berets, and it was done through a program that introduced martial arts and meditation to Green Berets. And you saw that these macho guys over the course of the book develop this other side where they become a little more sensitive, a little more caring. Their characters develop. And that started it right there. I thought, well, if these Green Berets can kind of turn things around, these macho dudes, and I was kind of living the life of you might call him a bro now, but back then, maybe I was living kind of a wild life. I thought, hey, maybe there's a path here that can help me change. And from there, it snowballed. One book led to another book, to another book, to another book, and my appetite became ravenous. I read as much as I can when podcasts came along. I started listening to podcasts. And it really took a long time for some of these messages to sink in. It was a long process. I could say 20 years before I think I saw any change, although there were small changes over that course of time. But I think the benefits that I eventually found from all these different spiritual paths, um, I began to want to share. And that's what led me to writing a column at Pathos. Before that, I wrote for a publication called Elephant Journal for a little bit and a publication called Contemplative Journal. And then joined Pathos in about 2012. I've been sharing the stories ever since. And the book is really a compilation of I think it's 112 stories. I've written to this point 550. So it represents what I think were the top stories, stories that I feel each have a little piece of wisdom to offer.
Thank you. And I think each of us is triggered at one point in life to step on the spiritual path, either by a book, a thought, a friend, a movie, something that will come at the right moment and will push us gently, will give us a nudge to step on that path, which usually goes slow, like moving floor in the airport, and then slowly it will go faster and faster as we adjust to the thoughts and the speed and the mindset.
Yeah, it does take a while for it to sink in. And I can tell you career wise, if I look back on my career, it had to change. In my first 10 years in advertising, I worked at 8 different companies. I was always jumping from job to job. Over the next 20 years, I only worked for 3 companies, and then last 15 years, one company. So it kind of calmed my perspective on what I was really searching for. in life. There's a guy by the name of Arthur Brooks who does a lot of social research, and he talked about this. I believe it's a Hindu system that our life is roughly split into four different quarters. These quarters last 25 years. And in this first 25% of your life, and you can roughly say it's from 0 to 25, you're learning. You're learning, you're learning, you're learning. When you hit your early 20s, roughly 25 to 50, it's all about the pursuit of things, the pursuit of a career, the pursuit of romance, the pursuit of fame or money. That is kind of 25 to 50. And a lot of people, it's not till we get to that next phase, that third stage at the age of 50, that we begin to realize, well, you know what? Those may not be the most important things in life. There might be something else out there. And I call it a yearning. And you can misidentify that yearning as I need to go for more romance. I need to keep trying to climb the corporate ladder and get more money and more fame. But I think eventually you come to realize that that yearning is often a spiritual yearning from within, and that becomes your mission. You just want to satisfy and feed that spiritual yearning that's within you. One more point on that. So it took me a little while, even though I started reading in my early 30s. It probably did take me to close to 50 before it really sank in. But it did sink in. And I think what we see in our society is a lot of people get stuck in that second phase of life where that pursuit of fame and money and youth just continues well into their 50s, their 60s, and even beyond. And hopefully, if you want to find true happiness and contentment, you begin to make that turn where you try to satisfy that spiritual yearning within.
Yes, and you're right, because on my previous interview with Rebecca Davison from New Zealand, she mentioned that in fact, while she was in the mutual fund business and she had high net worth individuals, there were multimillionaires. And in the end, she said most of them were hollow. In the end, they found that the money didn't bring them happiness and they were looking for purpose and meaning in life.
Right,
So in the end, we have to combine this yearning for making money and achieving some physical goals in our life while we are working on ourselves
yes.
spiritually. So that's not still well understood in the society. And my next question is along this line because you mentioned about the Mayoruna tribe in the Amazon. And we consider these people savages. You know, they walk around naked, they sleep in mud huts or, you know, huts in general. And they don't have technology. They communicate telepathically. They are very
Right.
connected to nature. So is your hope that the Western society will sooner rather than later going to move into closer connection to each other and to nature and to ourselves?
Well, ideally that's what happens. I think we have hiccups along the way as a society. I mean, for me, I mean, I read this quote by it was I think Oprah Winfrey. I mean, the ultimate journey is the spiritual journey, and it becomes a very personal journey. And it's almost like I don't know if you can move society on mass, but you can move yourself as an individual and then try to spread out to other individuals. Um, the story that you mentioned about the Amazon, yeah, I mean, that kind of proved a point that um, I make in the book that this spiritual learning comes from all these different places, different religions, different philosophies, and from people that others might look at as, natives or below us, that there's real spiritual learning that can be found there as well. It comes from all walks of life.
Yes, and sometimes we have more to learn from them than our next door neighbor or colleague at work because these guys would be at the same level of ours or as detached from nature as we are at this point. So we really have to go back to the roots.
Yeah, speaking of business, I know you mentioned like one of the people that was an early influence on me in the business world was John Templeton. You mentioned his name. And Templeton, people that invest money may know of him. His name is still around as the Templeton Fund. But he was this legendary stock investor who he was called the contrarian. When people were selling, he was buying. When people were buying, he was selling. But he had this whole other side of his life. So he writes a couple of books. One is called Wisdom from the World's Religions, and this really thick book called The Worldwide Laws of Life. And this guy had studied religion and philosophy all his life. And by the end of his life, he moves to Bermuda. He Bahamas, excuse me. He used to vacation there. He apparently lived in a very simple house. He gave away virtually all his money, put it into a foundation, and they said that each day until near the end of his life, he would get up in the morning, he would wear a long sleeve shirt and pants, roll up his pants, walk out into the water, and then just walk at knee deep length. He would walk a mile or two in one direction and then come back again and then go to shore. And I thought, well, here's this guy who is as big a success as you could be in the business world. By the end of his life, he's finding meaning at the end of his life by wading through water for miles.
Meaning in the simplest things in life,
Well,
flowing
that
as
is isn't
with
that
water.
what it's all about?
Yes, because we
I
are
mean,
water.
yes,
And again,
eh,
just going back to basics.
right. There's if I can just share one other business story because um, there's another guy who early on had an influence on me, and the guy's name was Napoleon Hill, and his big book was Think and Grow Rich. Now, I thought of that book the other day, and it's amazing. I went to Amazon. It is still today. That book came out, I don't know, 50 years ago now, the number one self-help book. And if you read that book, it's a very capitalistic approach to he goes off on some interesting tangents, but it's basically he has talked to some of the industry leaders in the US, and it's all about having a positive mindset, visualizing that you're going to be a success, and then going for it, working as hard as you can throughout your life to become a success. When he's 84, Napoleon Hill puts out another book. And I checked this book, and I've read this book a few times. It's called Think and Grow Rich with Peace of Mind. And by the time he's 84, he looks back in his life and what he's taught and realizes that the message was wrong, that he had spent too much time and effort promoting work when you had to develop this other side of yourself, peace of mind. And he broke down the ideal 24-hour day. He said it was 8 hours of work, no more, less if you can, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of doing the things you enjoy. That book is ranked, I think, over 7,000 in the self-help category. So people and it's a Western thing, gravitated to the one message, but when he tried to correct the message many years later, no one really knows about it. But that to me, you read that book and okay, that's the essence. That's the essence right there. It's more than about just work. You need to develop this other side of yourself.
Yeah, it looks like it's the same in the news. You come with the news, piece of news which is not real, and then everyone will act on that emotionally, and then next day, when you come with the retraction, no one will pay attention
How
or
true.
will say we don't believe you anymore. It's the
Yes.
same principle.
Yes. That's another issue in our society. The facts have become very malleable these days. People
Yes.
want to create their own truth.
Tom, you also mentioned in your book someone which I'm very aware of, Swami Kriyananda, which was a disciple of Yogananda, and I'm also a disciple of Yogananda. So, how did you find Kriyananda?
I I am not. sure, to tell you the truth. It would have been one of these connections. One thing leads to another, leads to another. Um, I know Yogananda. One of the earliest lessons I learned from him was about meditation, where I for years did not meditate, didn't see the value of it. Um, just couldn't. I felt like I couldn't do it. I remember picking up a book that was like 300 pages long, and I look back on it, and that was the problem because can be, you can have on a single sheet of paper everything you know about need to know about meditation. It just takes some time. And Yogananda was one of the first ones to point that out to me that really you are trying too hard. And he put out a thin book about meditation. That's, I think, the best book of meditation I've read that basically just says that, hey, you try to quiet the mind, you come back to quieting the mind, you come back to quieting the mind, and it takes time. And in time, it becomes almost second nature.
Yes. Yeah, and Kriyananda, in fact, is the one who drew me towards Yogananda. I mean, I saw the autobiography of a yogi multiple times. I
Yes.
didn't pay attention, but then I found this old book by Swami Kriyananda and Western Yogi, signed by him, and I
Wow.
thought that's interesting, and I bought it. I read it just to find out that, in fact, he was born in Romania. His parents were from US, but they were detached to Romania for work, and he was born there. I'm from Romania as well.
Uh-huh.
And he told the story, his story, how he, at 18 or 19, read the autobiography of a yogi. They
Right.
were returned to US and become the disciple. And he never looked back. So I said, look, I have to read this book now. So this is how I got into autobiography.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, amazing. I just reprinted a story about George Harrison's favorite guru. It was Yogananda, and he actually had him included on the cover of the Sergeant Pepper album. That's much of an influence he had on him. But yeah, one of the great spiritual lights of our time.
And the reason I mention Kriyananda and Yogananda is because you discuss breath and how important breath is as part of a spiritual path
Practice.
and practice. Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with breath work?
Uh, You know, um, just to talk to meditation, which will lead to breath work. I got to the point where after a while I kind of began to get meditation, and the key was not being so hard on myself. And one important part of the meditation process, just to get out of your head, is to focus on the breath. And I've written about different breath techniques before. I think there's a 718 method Rashad Field has that I've used. But one of the most fascinating things I've ever read about the breath was it was a guy who went by the name of the Happy Good Fellow at Google. And his approach was he had he put out a book about some of the techniques he tried to teach within Google. He's no longer with the company, but he had something called the 3 second exercise. And the 3 second exercise was take a moment out of your day, focus on breathing in, breathing out. That's it. You're done. Do that once a day and try to build from there. And there's some truth in that I think as you begin to meditate, you I almost feel like at times I'm a little post meditation and that you can remember that state of mind and go back to it. And one of the best ways to do that is let me focus on the breath real quick. Let me just focus on one breath in, one breath out. And suddenly when we have that focus on the breath, what's in our head is has gone, at least for the moment, and it can, return us back to ground zero.
Yes, because when we take deep breath, they will balance us emotionally, especially when we have to make decisions or we are in a fight and flight situation. if we breathe before we start thinking about the decision, I think that will give us the balance we need. And usually on a daily life, we breathe very shallow. So we have to breathe deeply to the pit of our stomach and up again. And that
Right.
will give us more consistency.
You're exactly right. And amazingly, I took a deep breath as soon as you mentioned breath. It is easy to forget, but you have to have that mindset that the moment I feel a little stress, if I feel a little overwhelmed, to bring it back to the breath.
And when we take a
It's a simple act. Yes.
Yes. And if we want to add a little bit more complexity to it, when we breathe in and we take our stomach towards the spine, the cerebral fluid will go also up the spine, creating some pressure on the pineal gland. Again, you have to hold your breath at the same time, but still, if you don't want to do that, it will create that practice of putting some pressure on the pineal gland.
Hmm. Good advice.
Yeah, so there are many ways of breath work out there, Soma, Kriya Yoga, many, but they are all in the end go along the same line that the spine has to be straight, the breath has to be deep,
Mhm.
hold your breath in certain instances, and you'll get there. Sooner rather than later, you will get there.
Yes, it does take a little time, but it's worth the effort. And again, for all the years that I ignored meditation and breath work, when I realized how simple it was and how forgiving you have to be of yourself, and that becomes the obstacle in meditation is your mind wanders and then you criticize yourself. It's that little voice in your head. And the thing is, you have to be forgiving of yourself. Your mind is going to wander. But if you can just find those little moments, those few seconds where your mind is clear, you've had a successful meditation. Even if you do it for 10 minutes, and you find as time goes on, those moments begin to expand more and more.
Yes, indeed. Tom, another personality you mentioned in the book is Richard Rohr, which is a Franciscan friar, and I am
Yes.
familiar with his work. And he talks about loving kindness, and you really like the concept. Would you go a little bit deeper into it, please?
Uh, Loving kindness, yes, I mean, it's a concept that you'll hear in meditation as well. But as far as roar goes, I'm trying to recollect what I wrote there. But the loving kindness idea is just a projection that you then put out into the world. That if you can look at each person as to express goodwill toward each person that you see. And in meditation, it can start with, people you know in your family, even people that you work with and maybe not expect like that much. But if you can extend this idea of loving kindness to them, it actually makes you feel better, not just about yourself, but about the people around you or anybody that you're dealing with. Um, I know it's hard to do, but it can actually be a big help when you realize that the people around you are, going through struggles just like you and may not have the resource or the outlet uh, uh, to basically course correct and correct themselves.
And in order to practice this concept of loving kindness, do you think that we have to connect that with the fact that we have to love ourselves first before we can practice
Well,
it?
well, positively, it's that old story about when you're on the airplane, you put you're always supposed to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on the child that might be sitting next to you. But positively, it's got to start with loving yourself. If you don't love yourself, it becomes impossible to love those around you. I mean,
Yes.
that's a given. And I think sometimes you do need a reset. I mean, working in the business world as I have for many years in stressful situations, um, sometimes the loving kindness meditation is the best recipe after a long day to kind of calm you and then give you a more favorable outlook to the people that are around you that maybe during the day uh, you weren't too crazy about.
Yes, and for those who are interested in this concept and they want to read more about it, please check Richard Rohr's books and anything else he wrote on this along these lines.
Yeah, R Richard Rohr is a very interesting guy. He was raised in the church. He's a Christian, but if you read his books, you really almost in many cases wouldn't know what religion he was because he speaks of God in a very general sense. And I found, I mean, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I stopped going to church when I was 18. I'm a lapsed Catholic now. But one of the greatest teachings I got from Rohr was that was about Jesus and his opinion that we are beholden to Jesus. We follow the man and put him on a pedestal when we should be following the message. So we've sort of elevated Jesus to this superstar level, but that's not what Jesus wanted. I mean, he wanted us to follow his message of we talked about loving kindness, but caring for those less fortunate than us. That message, as some people will point out, too often gets lost. But I think Roy does a great job of reminding us of the true um, not just the true message of Jesus, but you know the role of God in our lives as well. And I can tell you, Roar and other people I admire in the religious sphere, like Matthew Fox. Um, their opinion, of course, is that God is not an old man up on a throne in the heavens. God is a part of our everyday lives. God is, Emerson said, part and particle of our being. God is not a being, but being itself. That was Paul Tillich said that. But guys like Rohr will expand on that idea that God is not out there. God is here with us right now.
And along the same lines, because I wanted to ask this question. This is the perfect moment. What is your perception of God? Does it resonate with what Rohr says, or is a different perception?
It resonates with what Rohr has said and what Matthew Fox, there's a guy by Tom Stella who's written on the subject as well, that God is really the air that we breathe. I mean, God is within every atom. So if you look at God as not something out there, but here you start within us. God is within us, within all of us, and in everything around us. God is omnipresent, and we can tend to forget that. We don't realize that, and sometimes we need to escape. This is where spiritual practice comes in to get back in touch with this inner part of ourselves. Richard Rohr said something important. He said, uh, I have found that in the search for our deepest self, that is also the place that where we find God. So I do think there's something linked there, that when we look deeply within, and when we do this in these moments of meditation, contemplation, um, being out in nature, that is where we kind of tap into this inner guidance, this inner comfort that is God.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you with your perception of God. For sure. Thank you for sharing. So, Tom, we live in a very busy society. We are go, go, go pretty much every single time. And we talk about spirituality. We talk about taking a break from this craziness, walking in nature, walking meditation, or finding time for ourselves. But some of us think that being connected all the time is much more important. So, in your opinion, how important is to um, be by yourself? Is loneliness good?
Yes, there's a need for solitude and quietude. I I think on a personal level, I think it's necessary just to calm the mind, especially after a busy day. But if you really want to connect to God, to something greater than yourself, then you're not going to do it usually within a group. I mean, I was in a church service the other day, and it was a Catholic church, and they had communion, and I was invited up to go for it. And someone next to me, a friend said, "Oh, aren't you going to do communion?" Which I have done countless times in the past. And I said, "No, I'm not comfortable." And they said, "Well, you can go up and get a blessing." And I thought, and I said, I don't think I need a blessing because I don't need to go through the middleman to go to God to get that blessing. But this idea of a spiritual practice is kind of a reset, and for me, the spiritual practice becomes a solo journey. So I start in the morning, and I think you have to find these moments by yourself. It can be late at night if you have a busy family. It can be in the morning. And because for a lot of us that are still in the working world, even work from home, we have trouble finding the time. So for me, I get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee, and I will, this time of year, sit in front of an electric fireplace. Other times a year, I will just sit by a window on the porch looking out at nature. And at that point, I kind of try to center myself, and I've heard it defined as contemplation. I contemplate, but then I've also heard it referred to as prayer. I mean, I was reading, I can't think of the author, but his belief was that prayer is not communication, it's communion. So I think that that is important, that communion with something greater than yourself. And as I said, it doesn't have to get fancy. You don't have to include even meditation in there. It's if you have the ability to quiet your mind, it's sitting there, in contemplation, and then just resetting your internal clock, your internal being.
Yes, and to reinforce what you said, recently I've heard, I think several times within a matter of 3 or 4 days, that happiness is an inside job.
Yes,
So if we really understand the meaning of that, um, being lonely, uh, it's a blast. It's a necessity.
it is. And I mentioned earlier about this yearning inside, this spiritual yearning, and I think most people get this yearning. I mean, they have this yearning, and sometimes it becomes misguided. What I really want, and you're chasing women or men in some cases. But that yearning, that spiritual yearning, to really satisfy it, you're not going to satisfy that going out with your friends, as nice as that might be. You're not going to satisfy that in front of the television or on your smartphone. You need to cut that all out, and you need quiet. You need a little cone of silence around you. And I think it's important to find that time. Um, Again, I can recall at one point I was working in New York City and the office was crazy. It was hectic. And you'd leave the office and the streets were just bustling and it was hard to find any peace there. So I would frequently just duck into a local church. I would sit in the back row and I would get my 10 or 15 minutes there of quiet just to reset yourself. And I think when we're go, go, go all the time, we are probably ignoring this very important part of ourselves.
Yes, the communication channel is clogged when we do that, and we need to keep it clean as much as possible.
Oh, just one more note on prayer. I just thought of a Merton quote as well. It was to the effect of Thomas Merton. He said he was asked about prayer, and he said, "My prayer is to breathe." So, you can take that in a number of ways, but my take on that was the guy is just so zoned into life around him that each breath he takes, he is reconnecting with this greater force around us.
Yeah, conscious breath work.
Yes.
Yeah. And Tom, we talk about spiritual quests and vision quests, and they are not too um, let's say popular in our society, but in the indigenous society pretty much they do this um, on a yearly basis for the newcomers, for people coming to age. um, so in the past, have you initiated a spiritual quest by going to certain locations which have particular energies, or you just you try to go inside and, as I mentioned before, find the happiness as an inside job?
I I would I would go with that the second thought. I do occasionally. I mean, I talked about ducking into a church in New York. Um, we'll visit Key West, Florida quite a bit, and there's a beautiful Catholic church there, and I will duck into there, and it's usually open during the days. It's open air, the breeze is blowing in, and there are just some places, and you can find this outdoors as well, that you sense a presence where it's just the presence of this divine force, and God becomes kind of a loaded word, but this divine force, this present, can be found in certain places. So I totally agree with that. That said, I I I think that it can be done anywhere. And I'll share a little anecdote. And this is from right when I first started getting into spirituality. I may have alluded to before I was married, I was kind of leading a kind of a crazy life and partying a lot. And I can recall going out one night with a buddy of mine, and we met two women at a bar. The bar shut down, so we go back to uh, the apartments of one of the two girls, and she's a flight attendant, and my friend leaves and the other woman leaves and it's just me and her there. And I, of course, at the time I'm thinking, oh great, this is a time for romance. So what she does is she um says, she asked me what size am I, and I said, large. So she says, wait here a minute, and she comes back with a pair of gym trunks, and she says, can please put these on. And I didn't know what was going on. I said, sure. Took my clothes, I put on these gym trunks. She puts on a bathing suit and she says, follow me. And in this little two-bedroom apartment, um, she fills up the bath with warm water. She says, come sit in the bathtub. So we sit in the bathtub with our legs crossed next to each other. She lights a candle, and directly across from the bathtub is a small vanity. She lights this beautiful large candle there. And she says to me, look at the candle. And we sit in the water. And at one point, I remember trying to touch her, maybe trying to get something going. She brushes my hand away. And we sat and watched that candle for probably 30 minutes, at least until the water was so cool that we had to get out. And I thought, wow, there is something happening here. This is so simple. It's in a little apartment. There's a candle. We're staring at the flame of a candle, but she's tapped into something here. And we got up, and she was like, all right, you can go now. And she shut her bedroom door and locked it. And I got dressed and I drove home in a daze, thinking, whoa, something happened here. I don't know what it was, but it was important. And I think it goes back to that question of solitude. I think in these very simple settings, you can tap into this force, this divine force.
Yeah, that was a good teaching, because romance you can find next day or next week, but you won't find a person which will create that experience for you while giving you the wrong impression initially, you know?
Well, that's it, and it goes to show you learn these lessons everywhere. They happen everywhere. In during good experiences, during bad times, there always seems to be lessons to be learned.
Yes. Tom, what would you consider an accomplished life?
Um, you know, going back to Templeton, he had this quote, and he said, and this is again, he's late in his life, and he says, it's not about material wealth, it's about spiritual wealth. And I think that's vitally important. I mean, I'm I am fortunate. I'm a writer. I fell into writing this column for Pathos, which then became a book, hopefully one of a few books to come. So I'm able to share that. But I think everyone, just on a smaller basis in their day-to-day lives, has the ability to make an impact, has an ability to I've called this the sphere of influence. We all have a certain group of people, whether they're work, neighbors, relatives, friends, that we have an impact on, that we can influence. And if we can have a positive impact on these people in our sphere of influence, that to me is an accomplished life. At the end of our days, if we said we can look back and say we had a positive impact, uh, that's been a good life.
Thank you.
Yes.
What else would you like to share about the book? Why would anyone pick up your book and read it?
Oh, I I think my book is it's possibly not for everyone. One of the things when I going back to those four stages of life, the third stage of life, according to this Hindu system, is we begin to dig into spirituality to look for greater meaning. The fourth stage, which I didn't mention, was, and this is late in life, we really go down the rabbit hole into a specific religion, a specific philosophy. My book is not for fourth stagers. It's for people in the second to third stage that want to get a big view picture of spirituality. And I go beyond spirituality because I think of part of being spiritual as being a good person, being humble, being of good character, etc. So I think anyone that has an inkling of a spiritual yearning, I think you're going to find something in this book. You might not like everything in the book, but you will find, I guarantee you, many things you like in this book. Um, I think of myself. Someone asked me this question the other day. Um, I don't. I'm more of a teacher. I don't have the knowledge, but I can point you to the knowledge. And I think of it as a beachcomber. I live in the East Coast of the U.S. and late in the afternoons on some days at the beach, you can see these old guys with floppy hats, and they have these metal detectors in the beach, and they're looking for rings or coins or watches or whatever. And I kind of look at me in this book as I'm that guy on the beach, but instead of looking for rings and coins and other valuables, I'm looking for spiritual wisdom. And every once in a while, I find a good coin about once a week, and I hold it up, and it's not for my pocket, it's for me to share with everyone.
Yes, very nice comparison and metaphor at the same time. Tom, we're approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
Uh, no, you can just a final thought. If this interests you at all, I you can find me at Pathos Wake Up Call. If you type in Pathos Wake Up Call, you can go through, I mean, over 500 stories. Or if you're a book reader, check out the book Wake Up Call, Daily Insights for the Spiritually Curious. It's currently available on Amazon and should be available in other places very soon.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, and good luck with the book.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for your time and thank you for what you're doing. I mean,
Thank you.
you're doing some great stuff. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And to my viewers, please subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done it so far, please subscribe, like the video, share it, like it. Go to spiritualinspired.ca for more interviews. And until next time, love and gratitude.